That's right. You're listening to another episode of the Co-Main Event Mixed Martial Arts Podcast. I'm Chad Dundas. That's Ben Folks. We're both longtime MMA journalists, and for the last 14 years, we've been meeting here every week to break down all the action in the wild, weird, and occasionally wonderful world of mixed martial arts. Ben, sometimes we like to let the people behind the curtain here on the Co-Main Event Podcast. You know, we're not snooty. We're not going to be out here keeping secrets from the people, right? It's access all areas kind of show. You know what I mean?
Of course it is.
Today we're sitting here. We're trying to figure out exactly what we should do for this week's Co-Main Event Podcast proper during one of our very detailed and excruciating pre-production meetings with the whole team here at Co-Main Event LLC. And essentially the choice was, do we want to talk about what was an absolute dog shit main event at the UFC Fight Night this past weekend in Abu Dhabi, where Magomed Ankalaev, Big Onk, went out there and Big Onked his way to victory against Bogdan Guskov, just big onked all around the cage for 20 plus minutes before we got the stoppage here? Or would we rather look ahead to the amazing fight, the much anticipated welterweight main event this weekend at a UFC Fight Night event coming to us from Belgrade Arena, granddaddy of them all, in Belgrade, Serbia, featuring Uroš Medić against Daniel Rodriguez.
A little bit of a rock and a hard place situation for us, honestly, because we would either have to choose between, do we want to focus our attention on a main event that nobody seemed to enjoy, everybody seems eager to forget, and nobody can even agree if it meant anything at all to the division that it took place in? Or do we want to look ahead to a main event that nobody is talking about now, and they couldn't necessarily tell you what it's a fight for in that division? That's when it kind of hit us, I think. Chad, are we in a summer lull? Have the wins died down after the UFC White House event and the return of Conor McGregor, which LOL, and now the sails are just hanging limp in the MMA waters, and we're just all kind of floating around here waiting for business to pick back up again? Because honestly, if you look at like what we're dealing with here, we had these just historic high points, Jed. Historic events like the UFC White House thing. We get the Conor McGregor. We got millions and millions watching at home on Paramount Plus for these two events. And then now we go to, you were pretty decent UFC Fight Night with DDP Kamaru Usman, a lesser so fight night with Big Onk and Guskov. And then we got Medić versus Rodriguez, and we got Gamrot versus Salkilld. I know you're looking forward to that one. That's back home at the cozy confines of the Apex. Then you finally have a numbered event in UFC 330 where you're going to get to see Islam Makhachev and Machado Garry. Not necessarily the fight that was screaming out to be made in that division, but you understand why we're doing it. Also got Mackenzie Dern, the one that you forgot was actually a UFC champion. The one, if you were to sit down and I was like, make a list of the current UFC reigning champions, that's the one you'd forget. Is that, oh yeah, Mackenzie Dern has gotten a belt in this period of upheaval a little bit in the women's divisions, defending it against Gillian Robertson. And you kind of, other than that, then you're going to close out the summer basically with a fight over there in Shanghai where you got Umar Nurmagomedov and Song Yadong. Should be a good fight. But it also just feels like, okay, so we've seen as bright as the lights intend to get for the UFC this summer already. It happened pretty much all right there in June and the early part of July. And now it just kind of feels like there's a little bit of playing out the string going on until things pick back up again.
Would you go so far as to say we're in the dog days of summer?
Feels a little like we're in the dog days. It feels like, you expect that a little bit, and others, like baseball, the classic example, you expect it. You get to this point in the summer, it's a long ass season. The playoff race hasn't really ramped up yet. It's hot. Everything's moving slow. And you kind of expect that, coming out of the All-Star break, maybe your business is going to be a little slow there.
Yeah.
Has it always been this way in MMA?
I mean, this year in particular, we did have some big stuff that we were very much looking forward to, as you mentioned. The White House card, Conor McGregor's return. These were all really hyped events. I would throw the MVP card, Rousey versus Carano, in there too, just because, these were big hyped events that we were looking forward to prior to the bell, and now they're over. It feels a little bit like the day after your birthday, when you're a little kid, right? Now you got some time to wait before another one. Despite the fact that it was McGregor's return, it always kind of felt to me, or at least in years past, like International Fight Week was kind of a bigger deal. You know what I mean? Like at the usually beginning of July into June, something like that. We've seen the UFC put on multiple events, right, during International Fight Week before. So that traditionally has been maybe the climax of the summer. And this year, with Conor McGregor getting his whole shit broke during the opening seconds of that fight, obviously undermined that excitement. And now here we are. And with those two events, it feels like the UFC fired a lot of the bullets that they had available to them. And the pay-per-views that we have on the schedule, I feel like there's some bright spots there. There should be some cool stuff coming up in the fall, maybe toward the end of the year. But it does feel like we have hit this, like the doldrums of end of summer, and there's just not a lot of shit happening. And I guess if it has been like this, my question is why? Because you would think that this would be a great time for the UFC to seize the moment. Just generally speaking, in the sports calendar, right? This would be a great time for them to seize the moment where World Cup is over. Baseball, as you said, is kind of picking up after the All-Star break, but we still got a ways to go before we get into like meaningful games for the playoffs. You got no football. College football still a month away from starting. I kind of understand how this year was a special case with the White House and McGregor. But at the same time, if you're the UFC, wouldn't you want to have some blockbuster shit lined up for right now when there literally isn't much else to talk about?
Well, see, that's the thing, is it made me wonder, have they done maybe the research on this about, because you would think intellectually, just theoretically, this portion of the summertime should be a good time for you to announce yourself as a different sport. Once football starts back up, a lot of American focus is going to be on that. That also happens to coincide with the professional club soccer season. We're just coming out of the World Cup, but you're in this lull where the World Cup is over. The shit like the English Premier League hasn't started up. NFL hasn't started up. College football hasn't started up. All these other big sporting events, you had the NBA finals, the NHL finals, all that stuff is just kind of over. And there is this chunk of time where you could really have it to yourself. Maybe they have looked into it and been like, people just aren't at home watching TV that much. People are getting out. They're doing summertime things. As much as you would think, hey, these other sports aren't in the way, we could have a greater share of the audience. Maybe they're not in the way for a good reason, because they realize there's just not as much audience to be had. But it does seem like one of the things we were talking about in the lead up to the White House event, the long, years long seemingly lead up to this event, especially you had Donald Trump being out there being like, there's going to be 6 title fights. It's going to be 6, 7 title fights. And we all went, well, now, surely surely that is just a hyperbole from the man. But also with some of the big promises, we're going, wait a minute, is that why there's not a ton of movement in any division leading up to the White House card? That was a conversation before, right? Was how we got into the first quarter of 2026 and hardly saw any title fights and didn't see any booked. And we were like, what the hell's going on? Is it because they're saving it all up? And we went, okay, if you're saving it all up, that means you're starting this Paramount deal off with not a whole lot of championship caliber action. And then you will, on the backside, not have a whole lot because all those people will have just fought. And we didn't quite get that at the White House. And yet it still feels like that's kind of the situation right now. It feels like you have a whole lot of divisions where there's just not a whole lot happening right now. And I don't know. Because it's the thing is, it seems like whenever you hear from any fighter, they're all saying, we want to fight more. Mm-hmm. We want to stay busier. And so I am wondering, like, what's kind of the holdup there? Are we just not making the very top level fights? Are we just sort of moving along, making whatever is just laying right there? Like, hey, this guy versus this guy, sure, why not? Have him headline a card in Serbia, whatever, and moving on. I don't know. I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure how much of it is just like maybe our perception after sort of the come down from some of these big events, and how much is just that there really is not a ton of high profile action.
It's got to be a little bit, right, of a letdown maybe, because we had these big events and now we don't have much on the calendar coming up. But at the same time, not that we need to get into a big discussion about it all over again, but we have brought up the fact that we are in this era in the UFC where all of the money is guaranteed, right? Mm-hmm. We have already made the money for the most part. Obviously the live gate is something, and various site fees when you go from place to place is something. But for the most part, everything has been guaranteed. All of the money has been made and paid. And we are now in a situation where the UFC doesn't necessarily have an incentive to give us the biggest fights, except that, they have to make Paramount Plus reasonably happy. They have to steward the brand a little bit, you would think. But there has been this sense, just like around the entire sport and around this entire company, that like maybe the guys in charge have a set it and forget it attitude. Maybe the muckety mucks over there at WME don't totally want to sully their hands with the day-to-day operations of the UFC, and so basically they're like, Dana, to a certain extent, a growing extent, I guess, Hunter Campbell, you guys take care of this shit. And Dana White seems like he's pretty checked out from an inside the bubble view with Zuffa boxing and everything else that he is doing. He hasn't seemed as intimately involved as he always has been for the rest of this organization's life. And, maybe entirely due to Ronda Rousey, we have a somewhat negative public view of Hunter Campbell, right? And it just sort of seems like the whole enterprise at this point is lacking something, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you're right that it does seem like of all the different balls Dana White has up in the air, the UFC one seems least interesting to him. He seems like unenthusiastic about it compared to when you hear him talk about Zuffa boxing and even power slap, which is insane to say. And you're right that Ronda Rousey did kind of do a number on Hunter Campbell. And yet when you hear from fighters, you hear them like Dustin Poirier being like, he had that shit at the airport. Hunter Campbell's the guy who reached out. You hear Tommy Gunn McMillan, straight out of Great Falls, Montana, talking about how he was going to get his bonus and party. And it was Hunter Campbell who pulled him aside to be like, are you going to be okay with this much money all at once? It seems like he's kind of the hand on the throttle right now. And also, I think when you pair it with the thing that I hear from pro wrestling fans whenever I'm in any kind of like pro wrestling space on the internet is those fans are just like, TKO has just corporatized and taken all the fun and energy out of this brand in the WWE. And their sense seems to be that, that is a direct result of the people who want to be able to go to the shareholders and be like, making so much goddamn money, don't care how enthusiastic the fans might be about it. And it seems like it would be easy to talk yourself into believing that maybe something like that is also happening on the UFC side. The upside is, and maybe this is a thing that like the UFC gets too used to leaning on, you can kind of book a fight card where you got, you 10 to 12 fights. You got so many good fighters in the UFC at this point. You can kind of book it and just be like, someone that people aren't even really thinking about right now going to go out this weekend and have themselves a banger fight probably.
Yeah.
Might not be the main event, might not be the one we wish it would be, but somebody going to go out there and have a pretty good fight. And then we can come out of it being like, see, we're still delivering that action. Still delivering the knockouts, the fun finishes, stuff like that. Plus, we've just sort of made it into a weekly show that's on Paramount Plus. It's there if you want to watch. No big deal if you don't. And it seems to be working really well for them. So it's like, it feels like a lot of us are sitting around in the bubble talking about a problem that they don't even recognize as a problem.
Yeah, because it's not a problem for them, right? Like we've talked about this a million times, that as long as they're making money hand over fist more and more all the time, as far as they're concerned, everything is going great. And they will say that out loud when you ask them about it, right? If you bring Dana White any kind of criticism of how things are going in the UFC, what does he always say? Oh, packed arenas, live gate record, McGregor, we made all this money, White House, the greatest moment of his life, the greatest experience of Dana White's life, he said during an interview. Not just professionally, personally and professionally, the greatest experience of his life was doing an event at the White House this year. So as far as Dana White is concerned, things are going great. But this, if you're asking the question, like, are they sending Rock'em Sock'em robots out there every weekend and just saying, hey man, we're going to get a highlight stoppage and that's going to be good enough? That's a conversation we've been having since the middle of the Fox deal, right? That the UFC seemed like they made this wager that as long as the brand was there, that the fighters were more or less interchangeable. And it has turned out that they are right, essentially, that has been enough. Are we reaching a breaking point with that? I don't know. It just does seem like we've been dragging this thing along for years now, with it kind of like with the trend line headed down instead of headed up for the most part. And one of the things I wonder to that extent, not that we want to get sidetracked by gambling, but like if you look at the betting lines for a lot of these recent UFC events, and this was the case over the weekend with this event, there's a lot of mismatches on here now, man. There's more than you used to see. Uroš Medić is a more than a 3-1 favorite over Daniel Rodriguez. Navajo Sterling, who just fought. And now he's a replacement in here against Jan Blachowicz. He's more than a 3-1 favorite. Alexander Rakic is more than a 3-1 favorite. You go down the list and you're just seeing, 3-1 favorite, 3-1 favorite, 4-1 favorite. It's just like, are we doing that because we know that if that we'll get some stoppages if that's what we do, and that's our entire booking philosophy at this point? I don't know. I'm merely asking questions.
Well, one thing I do think is interesting to note, we talked about this, I believe, on last week's Power Hour, where Robelis Despain got re-signed by the UFC after we saw him over there in MVP MMA. We also see Saladin Parnasse, who is coming in here, is going to fight Dan Hooker in his debut over there in Paris. Dan Hooker saying he's getting a lot of hate. Chad, I don't know if he said so that the French fans, this is his quote from Submission Radio. I feel like I'm pissing off this kid. You're ruining his plans. You're ruining these boys in France. From memory, I can't even say I watched any of the French events. The death threats have been outrageous. I didn't get it when I fought Benoit Saint-Denis. Like, just the French people and speaking French telling me I'm going to die and telling me they're going to kill me and shit. the death threats have been outrageous.
Worse than the normal death threats. Is what that sounds like.
Something about maybe the way Dan Hooker lives. You believe like you threaten him with death, and he's like, "Well, I've heard that before." That's not
this. This is a middle of the pack death threat, is what this is.
Yeah, no specificity to it at all. But we saw Saladin Parnasse as like the big. And there was another instance of what you're talking about. MVP, they stacked their card with a bunch of mismatches.
Absolutely.
It was very easy to pick those fights. It was, I think, one of the only fight cards of the year where I think everybody on the uncrowned crew was flawless in their picks. Never happens, trust me. And so you see him come out of that one. The UFC has already signed now 2 of the guys off of that fight card.
Yeah.
And this is the kind of thing that didn't used to happen that much, where like somebody being brought in as sort of a free agent. I mean, Robelos is being re-signed, but still like people being brought in where the UFC saw them somewhere else and basically said, get me that guy, rather than just like get us some guys feeding into the system from the Contender Series, from the Ultimate Fighter, like saying, okay, that guy, we watched his last fight. We watched him at this thing. And whether you're doing it to take him off the board for MVP MMA so that they don't have anything to build on if they want to try to do a next show on Netflix sometime this year, or whether you just like saw and were like, all right, looks like there's something there. Go give that guy a contract. Let's throw him in there against Dan Hooker at home and let's see what he can do. It does seem like there's at least a little bit of an awareness of like, who's exciting out there? Who is starting to build anything for themselves? Let's go get them.
Yeah, and like you said, it's probably not a coincidence that they went out and got 2 of the guys that seemed like they could be real building blocks for MVP. Everyone was talking about Robelos Despain versus Francis Ngannou as a potential fight after the first MVP event, and of course, we're putting the French fight is the main event. Right? Versus Dan Hooker. That's the featured fight. So you don't see that every day. So it does seem like the UFC looked at all of the non-geriatric options, let's say, over there in MVP and was like, let's take these 2 guys. Let's pull these out from under them.
And, and honestly, I could see how those are the 2 guys you'd choose if that's what you were doing. Yeah. Do you think if you're Dan Hooker and they call you up, I know you're telling yourself, I'm going to spoil the party and make all the French people mad. But you got to also think that maybe the UFC didn't call you up because they see a booming, ongoing Dan Hooker business in their future, right?
Yeah, and that is another thing that's been happening a lot. So
they're like, who'd go out there and give this guy an action kind of fight, but also one that he could probably win? Dan Hooker will plant his feet and throw, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Remember, you're listening to the Co-Main Event Podcast. Proper brand new episodes of this show drop for free in your podcast feed every Monday afternoon. So make sure you're subscribed to the show. You won't have to go looking for us. We'll just show up every week like a comforting old friend with bad jokes and questionable opinions. Another way to make sure you don't miss an episode is to head over to our new website, comainevent.com. Sign up for the newsletter over there. That way we'll email you whenever a new episode comes out. We promise not to fill your inbox with junk, but who knows? Maybe you'll get the occasional special offer or news update for your trouble. As a reminder, we are still a completely independent operation. No corporate overlords, no fat cats. The discourse remains unfettered. There is literally no one to stop us from saying whatever we want, which is terrifying.
Yeah.
If you're into that sort of thing, do us a favor. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us one of those sweet, sweet 5-star reviews. And if video is more your thing, come find us over at YouTube at Co-Main Event Podcast. We're also on Facebook. We're also on Instagram, basically the whole internet. Now, if you really want to level up your support, come join us at patreon.com/co-main event. This is where the real serious action happens. We're over there dropping bonus episodes almost every day of the week. There's the live chat driven entirely by your questions. There's the Power Hour, where we go deep on MMA for the true shit-eating wild people out there. And there's Doing the Damn Thing, where we talk about all the stuff outside of MMA. we think you might be interested in. Turns out we have other interests. Who knows? Plus, we got all the live watch parties. We got the CME Movie Club making its triumphant return. The Discord is popping off all day, every day. They're talking about fights, nonsense, whatever people decide to argue about. So come hang out. We honestly think it's the best value in MMA. That's patreon.com/co-main event. And don't forget, while you're over at co-mainevent.com signing up for the newsletter, we got merch over there. It's all designed in partnership with our guy, Johnny Ashcroft from Portland, Oregon. He's an outstanding graphic designer. If you need design work done, check him out at studiosuperconductor.com or on Instagram at studiosuperconductor. All right, like we always do about this time, let's do a little bit of listener mail.
Listener mail.
Ben, it was pointed out to me after the fact last week that I stepped on your line and I didn't give you the chance to say listener mail in your listener mail voice last week.
It's good. I'm just on autopilot for that portion, so I don't even notice.
Well, I apologize. I didn't mean to steal your lines like Johnny Taco or whatever.
I'm going to motherfuck you up and down like Dana White did. You piece of shit.
First piece of listener mail this week comes to us from Chris Reaney over on Patreon. He wrote, guys, I am an avowed hater, but I must eat crow. Daniel Cormier was excellent on the broadcast in round 4 of Ankalaev versus Guskov. John Gooden would set him up with prompts to explain the grappling and choke sequence, and he'd execute them. DC and Lorosenko had great back and forth about technique. I saw the fight differently through the eyes of someone who was knowledgeable. The rest of the fight was pretty classic DC, but I saw the analyst lurking beneath the surface, and I would like some more. I mean, if you're going to compliment anything about Big Onk against Bogdan Guskov, it might as well be the call. Might as well be the commentary team, because they didn't give us nothing out there in the cage.
I feel like there is a way to pull more authenticity out of Daniel Cormier, and it's him getting mad and frustrated with what he sees from fighters. If you can get him there, you're going to get eventually a more honest version of Daniel Cormier, rather than at times it feels like he's selling the product to you. But if he can just watch some guys and just be like, what the fuck? Why aren't they doing anything? How did they just let these rounds slip by without actually doing anything? Like, the fighter in him, the coach in him, the guy who wants to show up at practice and ask you why the hell you even bothered to show up today if this is all you're going to do. That guy's in there still.
Mm-hmm.
He can be brought out. And I hope maybe especially you can see maybe a world where Daniel Cormier gets a little older, gets a little more ensconced in that position, and starts to give a little less of a fuck, and could just be out there being like, this is dog shit right here between these two guys.
Well, you know what's going to get DC fired up every time is if you're making mistakes in the grappling.
Yeah.
Like, if you're trying to put the choke in from the wrong side, something like that, Cormier is not going to sit over there and just take it silently.
There's an opportunity to run the pipe and you don't do it.
Look out. You're going to hear from him.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to hear from DC in that case. Next question this week comes to us from John Too Gooden.
I see
what they did there.
Yeah, I get
it. Guess what? The name puns they're not over yet. Okay. John Too Gooden writes in to say, the only thing entertaining about Ankalaev is how much it's going to hurt Dana to have to wrap the belt around his waist again. Also wanted to submit a nickname for Tyrell Fortune. Soldier of ... I
don't know if the kids these days will get that reference.
You don't think they'll get Soldier of Fortune?
So, Soldier of Fortune was a magazine.
It's also a term. It's just a term, but you know.
Right. People don't use it really. When's the last time you ever heard anybody use the term? You say mercenary.
Yeah, mercenary. That's a Soldier of Fortune.
Yeah, but it's a much quicker route to describing it by just saying this one word, mercenary. You hear the word mercenary sometimes. You don't hear like, this guy's a real Soldier of Fortune. Like, it was the term mostly became like popularized through popular media because you had this magazine, which I don't know. I remember
Well, that
seeing the
term
magazine.
came before the magazine.
Right, but I mean, we have a simpler way to say that. The reason that that term survived, I think, as long as it did, and to enter the popular lexicon, like when you would hear, if I told you like the line "Soldier of Fortune" appears in this movie from the 80s, you're going to be like, they must have been making a reference to the magazine. And here's the thing, that magazine, I don't know if you ever like looked through it. I remember seeing it. I remember being aware of it because of how often it was used as like a joke or a reference point in like movies. But let's just say I don't know if it was one of the main survivors of the print apocalypse that happened after the popularization of the internet. So I don't know if the kids these days, if he goes out there as Tyrell Soldier of Fortune, they'll be like, this is just a thing this guy thought up.
So you're going with the mercenary.
I don't.
Tyrell.
No, I'm going with Brewster's Fortune. Tyrell Brewster's Fortune.
It's not even the name of the movie, man.
Was it Brewster's Millions?
Brewster's Millions.
Ah, god damn it. I was trying to think of a reference even worse than Soldier of Fortune. I mean, if you're Tyrell Fortune, that's kind of a rad name. You don't really need a snappy nickname there.
It looks like Soldier of Fortune magazine could still be operational.
Man, I hope it's just a FBI front to collect names. Whoever signs up for a subscription to Soldier of Fortune, they go right on a list. That's got to be the play here, right? Seems like Tyrell Fortune does not have a nickname.
Yeah, I saw that. So he could be in the market. Here's the thing. I don't know if the kids, again, generational, will know this, but when we were young and your mom would take you to the store, she might just leave you in the magazine section.
Yeah.
You know, and you'll be over there. That's how you could pick up Soldier of Fortune magazine, read it. You could pick up Kung Fu magazine, right? You could pick up Thrasher, right? Read whatever you wanted. Hell, at some point you could have picked up UFC magazine. Just sit over that and read stuff until your mom came and got you. Said it was time to go through the checkout line. I don't even know if that still happens.
Man, if you go to the Soldier of Fortune magazine website, sofmag.com, they also might have had an issue getting the domain that they wanted. But one of the top stories is, "This is what war smells like, a dispatch from Ukraine." So maybe that's the kind of shit we've moved into. We're still selling tactical gear and survival stuff and all kinds of things like that. Best of SOF. I'm gonna click on that link. Just save that one for later. The thing I remember about being left I remember once having to go to a church youth group, Chad, where they took us to the mall and there was like, we're going to do some kind of scavenger hunt. And I think the point of the scavenger hunt was to drive home to point to us that like popular culture is bad and satanic and is suppressing like good Christian morals and instead trying to infect you with devil worship stuff. Because there were stuff like, see how many AC/DC album covers you could find that make reference to hell or the devil or something like that. And one of them was, see how many pictures of the devil you can find in a copy of Thrasher magazine, which is when I looked up and flipped through it and I was like, fuck, Thrasher magazine is kind of rad.
Yeah.
I'd never looked through a copy of it before. I was like 12 years old being like, oh no, sure enough, here's a dude in the devil costume skateboarding. I want to see more about what he's about. This guy seems interesting to me. And I was just like, I think this backfired on him.
That's how you found out about stuff.
I didn't even skateboard. They got me into Thrasher magazine.
Now, if you go to soldieroffortune.com, the landing page appears to be an actual like job board for mercenaries. The world's #1 job board for security, paramilitary, and private military contractor professionals. So scary. It's a scary ass website. But if you click, I wanted to see the job board, right? I was like, oh, I can't wait to see the fucking job board.
They're not going to show it to a fucking poser like you, are they?
Well, if you click on it, then it just turns into like a clearly like a stock website for corporate recruiting solutions. You know, it looks like the sample of a website that you would download on your template. So okay. I don't know if soldieroffortune.com really Don't know if they got too heavy into the site there. So next question this week comes to us from Pissed Off Lawyer, who writes, apparently Dana White just told some podcast host that he and Lorenzo, quote unquote, thanked God that Fedor said no to a contract offer back in the day, and that in fact he does not, quote unquote, regret his inability to sign Fedor. You sure about that? This has vibes of, I'm glad she broke up with me, bro. Best thing to ever happen to me. Please discourse. If I'm not mistaken, this was also on the pivot, because we talked about this last week on the Patreon, and I seem to remember that this was on the pivot, because as part of this interview, Dana White said that was the only fight they ever tried to make that they failed to make, was Fedor versus Brock Lesnar. And I was kind of like, yeah, that's the only fight? That's the only fight you ever tried to make that you didn't get it done? Really? So maybe it sounds like Dana White is out there on the pivot, just telling on himself, perhaps.
Yeah, and it does seem like these stories, one maybe through line here is, here's a time when we almost had to pay fair market value for something. Woo! Dodged a bullet there. Didn't have to end up doing it. I mean, I could see how maybe you look back, because he's told this Fedor story many times over the years, but it's changed. The story has changed as he's told it over the years, and especially as like perspective has changed on it, because the thing I remember him telling us at first about his meeting where he was talking about negotiating with Vadim Finkelstein, and he was telling him, hey, you think Fedor is worth all this money? He's one punch away from being worth zero. Kind of implying that the only thing Fedor had going for him was that he hadn't really been beaten in an MMA fight. And then pretty soon after that, we saw him beaten by Fabricio Verdum. Remember that when Dana White just tweeted like a smiley face afterwards? But then he continued to be a pretty marketable draw for years afterwards, to the point where it was harmful to his health, because everybody was like, man, Fedor don't have it anymore. We should stop throwing him out there. But people will still pay to see him. And so there's still promoters out there who are going to be willing to pay him to keep showing up here. And so it was like the UFC could have maybe done something with Fedor, but also seems to have talked themselves into believing like Fedor was just on the verge of a terrible fall off. He was going to be dog shit. We would have overpaid for a guy who didn't do anything for us at all anyway. And plus, who cares? You can just have Brock Lesnar against whoever you got. Mark Hunt, when it comes down to it, you know?
Yeah. Mark Hunt, by the way, not past his prime in any way, shape, or form. Although they tried not to sign him too, right? They
tried to pay him off.
They were just going to let him play out the string, and he came in and turned out that he won several UFC fights right in a row.
And now they got to have his picture up on the wall for security, just so he doesn't get near Dana White.
They got his picture up behind the counter, like, do not accept a check from this person. All right, this is an interesting one from Ravine the Impossible, who wrote in to say, hello, boys. I think us gentlemen of a certain age, quote unquote, longtime fans, may be a little too precious about the sport. I've been meaning to write in for a while on this topic, and the McRapist weekend cemented the idea. I also took the constructive criticism on my grammar, punctuation, and syntax. School served me primarily as a means of transportation to other schools to tackle and wrestle their kids. I digress. The gym I co-run watches most of the fights together for team building and education. As a competitor, coach, and cornerman, I try to dissect the fights, take notes, and point out concepts we've been working on, etc. We have a lot of younger guys and gals in the room. As you've discussed ad nauseum for essentially the duration of this spring and summer, most of the quote-unquote big fights have been big, based more on entertainment and nostalgia than relevance to crowning deserving champions or sorting out the division. This has caused me much consternation, but when listening to the youths, they love it, the way I used to love fight nights. So I suppose it's possible this is a wise promotional direction. After all, we were complaining about quote-unquote sameness, for lack of a better term. Some quotes from said youths that kind of make me remember being young, dumb, and there for fun. I apologize in advance for the slang. Quote, are two hella hot chicks fighting in this one? Quote, Hokit is peak heavyweight MMA. Quote, bro, BMF should have to be defended every Saturday. Quote, Jake Paul is low-key legit. Going to skip down here. It's not necessarily cerebral or nuanced analysis. Point is, we might be overthinking it, or at the very least, maturing out of the demographic these promotions want to capture. I still love it, but definitely in a much different manner than the kids I'm coaching. Shoulder shrug emoji. That's an interesting point, don't you think?
It is. It is, especially because we've talked before about how MMA seems to have a higher churn rate than a lot of other sports, which makes sense. It's such a personality-driven sport, an individual-driven sport. You're not getting people to buy in on the identity of a team that even if the personnel changes, the team itself endures, and you're going to follow them for 30 or 40 years. It's different, and so people might move in and out of the fan base, and that makes sense. It is... it makes me a little sad to consider like that we're thinking of the peak audience now of they're wondering if two hella hot chicks are in this one. They also think that Josh Hokett is peak heavyweight MMA, maybe because they just haven't seen back when heavyweight MMA was much better. That is a little bit of a bummer to think that like this sport, as we've talked about before, doesn't do a good job of telling its own history because there's no money in the history. Yeah. The money is always in the next fight. And so they don't really do too much to try to get you to, like, if you land in this sport and are picking it up, they're not trying to let you know, here's what the situation was 10, 15, 20 years ago. And every once in a while it sort of comes up, but not that often. And so you could just kind of float along, and to you, the MMA world was invented 5 minutes ago. And that's the only frame of reference that you have to compare what you're seeing as you. So like that is entirely possible that is who they're thinking of as the demographic. And they go, look, you serve these guys up whatever result they've known. They're not, they can't long for the days of a Pride 2005 Grand Prix that they don't even know existed. Shit like that would make sense. It's a little bleak, but there's probably something to it.
They don't even know how much they don't know. Is that what you're saying?
That's kind of what I'm saying.
It's a good email to the podcast from Ravine the Impossible. And you know what? The grammar and syntax I thought was very well done.
Okay. Here's what I want to do when I looked at this list of decontextualized quotes from the young kids he coaches. Pick the one that you think is the most true, the one that you could see yourself most agreeing with if you heard it come out of their mouths.
I gotta say it's Jake Paul's.
I know, right? That's ridiculous. That was the one I was gonna pick. Jake Paul is low-key legit, especially if my understanding of what low-key means. I mean, it's just a little bit quietly, sneakily, a little bit legit.
Yeah, I think that's the one. Last question this week comes to us from Darkwing Duck, who writes in to say, so McGregor's out for a year. What do you even do with this boob? That's right, I said boob. Wow. When he comes back, seems pretty likely that Max will have moved on by then, and a third matchup between the two might not make sense, plus might be promotional poison. Give the boob muscle milk, Mike? ? See if you can drag Nate Diaz back in. Try to put over some younger, tougher guy who might also send the boob out on a loss. What say you? I can't remember how much detail we discussed this on this show, because we might have talked about it a lot over on the Patreon page. I don't recall exactly, but it does seem like a quizzical decision for the UFC, and one that obviously Dana White is saying publicly they're not even going to think about until McGregor's knee has been put back together. And he's ready to come back, which is probably the right take. Probably too early to even consider who might be around for the offing. And McGregor has said it's got to be Max, but I have like Darkwing Duck, I have a hard time believing that Max won't have moved on to slightly more relevant things at that point.
Yeah, well, or It could go the other way, because imagine, like, we saw what happened with Muscle Milk Mike, right? Like, by the time McGregor was ready to get back in there, Michael Chandler didn't seem like such a glittering prospect for him anymore. If Max Holloway, after this goes on, they put Max Holloway in there, some tough fights, and maybe he loses one or two, then by the time Conor McGregor comes back, he might go, well, I don't want to fight him now.
Yeah.
But I do think on the UFC side, it will depend entirely on, does Conor McGregor end up signing a new deal with them, or is he just finishing up this one fight so they can get to free agency and go box Jake Paul, who is low-key legit or whatever? Because if that's the thing, if they're seeing like, this is the last Conor McGregor fight we're going to get, and he's going to go out there, maybe work for a competitor in some form, then I think they're going to be like, what can we use him for that would be good for somebody else we still got? Somebody else that we can turn around and try to sell you 6 months from now. And that none of those fights would be good fights for Conor McGregor.
Yeah.
None of them.
Yeah. Am I going to reveal myself as an old softy if I just say that I'd love to see Michael Chandler's dreams come true? finally gets to the end of the rainbow, and Conor McGregor's sitting on a pot of gold over there.
It'd really be kind of a fuck you to all of us who kept telling him to give up on it. If he wound his way around the most like meandering, circuitous path to the waterfall, but he got there, seeing us at the top.
Yeah. I would love to see it. All right, that's going to do it for listener mail this week. If you have a question, comment, or concern that you would like to air to the podcast in future weeks, go over to the website, comainevent.com. Click the link at the top of the page that says email the podcast. That'll get you in touch with us. How bad was Big Onk versus Bogdan Guskov? And what is there to actually look forward to? We'll talk a little bit about that right after this. Ben, can I throw just a couple of stats at you?
By all means.
Bogdan Guskov, in a 4+ round fight against Magomed Ankalaev, threw 70 total strikes.
Okay.
70. And according to the UFC's official stats, 38 of them were at the legs.
Wow.
Almost half of his 70, I guess, more than half, right?
That would be a little more than half.
I'm not here for the math.
35, yeah.
More than half. I'm not here for the math. So that's bad. That's bad, man. You got to throw more than that.
Well, and a lot of them were just sort of like, just reaching out your foot to try to tap you on the calf. Just to make sure you're still there. That kind of a strike. Just chipping away at him.
Mm-hmm.
So that if it had been, say, a 17-round fight, by the end of it, Big Onk ain't going to be able to move anymore.
If it were a 17-round fight, we would all be dead. We all would have died.
And we would have been glad to be dead by then.
Surely from boredom. All right, here's the question. This is the question we want to ask. Let's leave them on a positive note here today. It's the dog days of summer. It's the doldrums. We got a bunch of dog shit fight nights back to back to back. What are you looking forward to in the sport for the rest of the summer on into the fall and maybe even the end of the year? What's keeping your bucket full here?
Well, I know you're going to say that it's Mateusz Gamrot and Quillan Salkilld. I know
I've been talking about that one for years.
You won't shut up about it. You absolutely will not shut up about it. I do think, seeing Islam Makhachev back is going to be interesting. Seeing how Ian Garry, a cerebral fighter when it comes to game plan, when it comes to tactical approach, how does he go in there and tell himself that he has got the Makhachev problem figured out? Because I'll be honest with you, I have concerns for him.
In that regard?
Yes. In that fight. I think there's a little reason to be concerned about his prospects here in this fight. is going to be another one of those fights where somebody tells us up and down he's been working on his wrestling, he's got the perfect plan to shut this guy down, and then Makhachev walks right across, picks him up, slams him down, and beats the shit out of him? Maybe. Or is Ian Garry going to get on that bicycle and try to stay away from this guy and try to figure out some other way to do a little something different against Islam? It's an interesting enough matchup, and you know that Ian Garry as a personality will do his best to try to sell it to you, even while Islam Makhachev is going to do a thing where he shows up in a tracksuit and just looks frustrated that he even has to go out there and convince this guy that he is not superior to him, which he seems to think should be evident to all without even getting off the bus. I think it's going to be an interesting enough time, an interesting enough thing. Like it's kind of the only thing on the calendar right now for the UFC's rest of the summer that I can look at and be like, okay, big, meaningful fight that does hold some interest, just because I don't know exactly how it's going to play out.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the only real marquee matchup that is on the schedule at this point. Tom Aspinall says he's back to full-time training after he's had, what did he say, 3 eye surgeries, I think, altogether, to try to get himself right after Cyril Gane stuck his fingers in his eyes like Tom Aspinall's head was a goddamn bowling ball. So if there's any possibility before the end of the year that we can put together Cyril Gane versus Tom Aspinall, for the unified title, I'll take that walking away. That seems like it would really pick us up maybe a little bit as we head into the end of the year. I think that would be a great one. You know what? I would like to see MVP come back. One more MMA show by the end of the year. Just give us something, show us some glimmer of desire to have your MMA promotion be more than one and done. That would be something that I think would be interesting, and see what the hell kind of fights they would make now that maybe two of their kind of interesting, maybe full-time guys have been squirreled away by the UFC. So I think that's interesting. Ian Garry, remember when Ian Garry just said out loud that he was going to need help when he was basically like, Dagestan, I need your help with wrestling?
I mean, he got Charles Oliveira's help, right?
Yeah, that's better than nothing, right?
I feel like you need to really early on in that fight give Islam Makhachev something to think about, either by shutting down a takedown, throwing something crazy, make him have to think about what you're doing, because otherwise that guy just probably trucks you, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. And Ian Garry is one of these guys that I feel like we perennially underestimate, though, also. If he came out and his takedown defense looked better than expected, I wouldn't be that surprised. I also feel like maybe Ian Garry is the kind of guy where he looks better than we expect, but he still loses.
That could be. Or another possibility, Ian Garry wins one of the worst UFC title fights ever. Wins a decision and we go, God, that was fucking awful. I could see that.
Wow, we really wanted to wrap it up on a positive note here today. You weren't having it. You weren't having it.
No, I got nothing.
All right, that's going to do it for the Co-Main Event Podcast this week. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We appreciate the support. We'd love it if you came over and joined the Patreon. We do have fun over there. We're there all week long. We think you'll like it. If you do that, we'll talk to you on Wednesday. If you don't, then we'll see you right back here next week. As for right now, we are done. We are through. We are out. I'll be honest with you. I like this version of Dana White who accidentally tells embarrassing stories about himself. I don't hate it.
You're saying you need him on more and more business podcasts so he can just sort of, over time, reveal all the things you shouldn't do.
Yeah, just like I want to see him in more situations where he thinks he's being cool, but actually he's telling on himself. That's what I want to see.
How did he think that negotiation with the computer guy was going to go? Like, the guy's going to name a price. You're going to say, fuck you, you piece of shit. And he's going to be like, all right, $20.
Well, I don't know, man, but I'm going to be emailing you www.ufccomputers.com right now.
Okay, I'm going to see what I can do with that.